Well, welcome back to Beyond the Binary. This is Benny, broadcasting on WDBX FM. You can catch us at WDBX.org, 91.1 FM, Southern Illinois Community Radio. You can catch me and Ari specifically at Facebook.com/Beyond the Binary. Let's go ahead and move it. Well, I should say that was the wonderful interview with the wonderful Zach. Had a really fun time conducting that interview. To be transparent, this interview was supposed to play a few weeks ago, but unfortunately, the application that I used to record our phone interview somehow lost the interview itself. And so that was Zach and I's second attempt. And so, Zach, if you're out there listening, whenever that is, I again thank you for doing this another time and taking extra time out to conduct that interview one more time. I encourage you all to go check out Zach's videos on YouTube as well. DebaserZ is the username that they use. All right. Well, yesterday was Labor Day, and I think it most fitting to begin our discussion a little bit today with some labor items of interest, particularly to trans folks out there in the world, out in the listening world. Excuse me. I turn first to the Transgender Law Center, who posts basically about well, they post tons of really great productive stuff, but particularly around labor, about knowing your rights in the actual workplace. And so, and what it means to file an employment discrimination complaint with the EEOC, the EEOC being the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So for some background, in 2012, the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission issued a landmark decision holding for the first time that federal sex discrimination law, or Title VII, covers discrimination against transgender employees. Now, this is huge, and this ruling was issued in the case of Macy versus Holding, and the Transgender Law Center was the legal firm or legal representation that stood on behalf of Mia Macy. So this was in favor. This ruling was in favor of Macy. Well, what does this all mean? Well, this means that transgender and gender nonconforming people everywhere in the United States are protected from from employment discrimination by federal law and have access to legal protection through the EEOC if they experience employment discrimination because of their gender identity or even their expression. Now, this is especially important for transgender employees in the 33 states that do not yet have state-level non-discrimination laws that explicitly include gender identity or expression. So, and really this ruling applies to all employers with 15 or more employees, and this includes private sector employers as well as federal, state, and local government employers. So if you work for a place that has 15 or more employees, this discrimination clause at the federal level does in fact cover you. Now, something to consider, though, is that if you are experiencing discrimination, and in a minute I'm going to read also another printout from the Transgender Law Center outlining kind of the 10 most common forms of discrimination that trans people in the workplace may experience, to kind of contextualize, like, or maybe even just affirm, like, yes, you are in fact experiencing what can be considered or construed as forms of discrimination. So some timelines in terms of statute of limitations. For a private business, you usually have 180 days from when the discrimination took place to file a complaint. Now that 180 days can be extended up to 300 based on what the state or local non-discrimination laws are, right? So they can really kind of build on one another and really extend what that might look like. Federal employee, now 180 days was for the private businesses. For federal employees, you have up to 45 days to file a complaint. Far less time frame there. And I think that that's really important to note because there tends to be this view as though trans people do not have any protection whatsoever. Well, in fact, we do have forms of excuse me, protection at the federal level. It is suggested, however, that if you are in a state that does have, or a local municipality that has anti-discrimination employment laws, particularly on gender identity and expression, to file at the state or local level and then to request that it also be filed at the federal level on your behalf. as opposed to going the other way around. And so you don't want to step over what's available. So it's still important to note what are your most local kind of regulations that are kind of guiding wherever it is that you are at. Now, to turn to a very interesting list of, excuse me, I'm part of my coughing this morning, the top 10 actions that may constitute discrimination of transgender people. I think this is very useful, it's very telling, and frankly and unfortunately, it's very common, all 10 of these things here. Number 1. Terminating or failing to hire someone because they are transgender. And so part of this failing to hire someone on the basis of being trans can be difficult, I think, unless it's kind of routine. And we see over and over again that this is perhaps a tendency of an employer. I think that more commonly it's that the trans person who does not pass as gender normative and stands out in some capacity isn't even awarded the job application at the get-go. And so it's kind of difficult to kind of make the case when the employer says, oh, we're not hiring right now, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard at some time in your life, no matter what the job is. Number 2, limiting a transgender employee's interaction with customers because they might not be, quote, comfortable with the person's gender expression. This is going to actually link us to one of our final stories today out of Oregon. In just a moment here, not really in the employee, but kind of in the same type of logic that I'm not going to put you in front of customers because you're going to somehow scare them away. Number 3, prohibiting a trans employee from dressing or appearing in accordance with their gender identity. The common variant here that ends up manifesting in certain lawsuits is applying a dress code more strictly for trans women than for cis women or other women identified individuals. Number 4, denying a trans woman access to the women's restroom or denying a trans man access to the men's restroom. The common variant here is requiring a trans employee to use a gender-neutral restroom. And so this is a really important point to pause for a moment and to really kind of consider and conceptualize what gender-neutral restrooms and spaces are. To enter one of those spaces, yes, you might be an ally, but the question becomes kind of what do you lose in terms of cultural clout by entering those spaces, whereas a trans body in some capacity can lose a lot of cultural power, whatever it is that maybe they've been able to access itself by marking themselves as a trans person entering what we might conceptualize culturally as a transgender space. And so making a gender-neutral restroom just for trans employees is deeply problematic for this reason here, particularly when it's only reserved for those bodies as opposed to more normative restrooms that we reserve for the, quote, normal gendered individuals at a workplace. Number 5, for sex segregated jobs or tasks, requiring a trans man to work as a woman or a trans woman to work as a man. Here's one of the anecdotes that kind of came up is a transgender man who worked as a police officer was frequently asked by coworkers to pat down female suspects. And this form of discrimination really just renders absent the male identity of this police officer and suggests that you are still and remain a woman and therefore are able to do the pat downs as opposed to calling in perhaps a cis-identified female police officer to do that pat down. Number 6, repeatedly calling a trans person by the wrong pronoun or name. Number 7, asking inappropriate personal questions about a trans person's medical treatment or their body parts. Number 8, outing a trans person to others without permission. A person's trans status is actually considered private medical information that's protected under all kinds of laws around medical privacy. And that's something to really consider even for yourself. If you're engaging with other folks, maybe you've accidentally outed other people. This is very dangerous. Outing people for anything, no matter what it is potentially a very dangerous thing. And I think that part of the interview actually with Zach that they and I were getting into is really surrounding kind of the idea of this was Zach's words, not mine. I don't want to take credit for this, but really assessing kind of your situation before you engage in any sort of decisions. And I think that's very important, particularly around this notion of, is a person trans or not? Do not out them. Allow them to make those decisions when and if they want to make those decisions. Number 9, requiring a trans person to present a birth certificate or a court-ordered name or gender change before the employer will agree to respect their gender identity. The moment that you identify as trans, do in fact out yourself, present in some capacity as a gender that perhaps others are refusing to see, you are allowed, you are given the federal protection to identify in that way. You do not need to provide any sort of proof in any capacity for what that is. And this is why the importance of wording like protection for gender identity and gender expression is so important in non-discrimination clauses, particularly in employment spaces. And finally, number 10, having discriminatory exclusions for treatment related to gender transition in an employee health plan. And so making sure that health plans really kind of across the board have provide access to all kinds of body, not explicitly leaving out certain protocols over others. And this kind of brings me to the final story I want to touch on before I take a quick break here. And this is a call out to my hometown in Long Beach, California. So an old, I'm going to call Porter a friend, but an old friend of mine, Porter Gilberg, a local activist, had collaborated with various community members, including the city manager and the vice mayor, all kinds of city leadership, and ultimately Long Beach joins Berkeley and San Francisco as one of the growing list of municipalities that include health benefits for transgender workers. So for those city employees who work for the city of Long Beach, there are now trans-inclusive benefits in the health plans. And this is huge news in terms of really kind of setting the tone for what these what these sorts of health plans can include. So I really take a moment to applaud Long Beach, and it really kind of speaks to this. That was me clapping, by the way. It really speaks to this 10th point on the list of ways that you might be experiencing discrimination, was that before something like this goes into place, like in Long Beach, the discrimination is the fact that there is health plans that others can access, but trans people cannot. Whether that's access to hormones, whether that's access to a therapist that is trans-inclusive, what have you. And so Long Beach now joins a growing list of cities and municipalities in the state of California to extend these trans-specific health benefits. And I find that to be very important. And I think that it's really, really important specifically around Labor Day. I think that Labor Day is every day of the year, but particularly yesterday being Labor Day, that we pay particular attention to the ways that trans bodies and individuals kind of negotiate workspaces, whatever it is that that might look like. And so I guess from me here, also from Aria through Spirit as she's heading back from Burning Man, to all of you out there that are negotiating and navigating the terrain of your various workplaces across the U.S. and wherever you're listening from, we wish you continued support and energy as you kind of work through some of the daily difficulties of just kind of working with your employer, working with your coworkers, working even with customers if you're in a customer service type job where you have to regularly interact with individuals, and how part of sometimes dysphoria and the difficulty of being trans is having to negotiate the daily pressures of people refusing to see you for who you are. We do see you for who you are, and we continue to support you in the ways that you labor, whatever it is that that labor might look like. With that being said, we're at the halfway mark, and I'm going to go ahead and take a quick break, and I will be back just after this song. I'm going to return to a song that I really enjoy today. It's called True Trans Soul Rebel by Against Me. And we will be, well, I will be right back. Welcome back to Beyond the Binary on 91.1 FM, Southern Illinois Community Radio, WDBX. You can catch us online, wdbx.org. You can also catch our show, Beyond the Binary, at facebook.com/Beyond the Binary. Pass the word, get involved in the dialogue. This is Benny. I'm here today by myself while Aria is heading back from Burning Man, and I'm sure that she'll have some stories to share with us all. Particularly in terms of, I think we're going to try to do a series of shows perhaps around soul searching, personal searching through the transition process and the various ways that maybe one comes to know oneself as trans, not just a realization one day per se, but even over time through the transition process, what type of individual you are, how you're experiencing transition and trans and what have you. And to be perfectly transparent, I'm smiling right now. Yesterday was the first time I'd actually heard Aaron's voice for, I believe it was just over 2 weeks, actually. So I was very pleased and I was very happy last night to go to bed after hearing her voice after so long. But anyways, let's get back to some of these news stories here. A bit of tragedy, I suppose, but so goes kind of part of the reality of living in a world that continues to kind of resist trans bodies and continues, I think more tellingly, to frame acts of violence against trans people as isolated events. And so part of our ongoing kind of politic here on this show is also really trying to raise awareness to the cycles of violence that are ongoing against gender nonconforming bodies, be a trans person, as in transgender, transsexual, as well as gender anormative, genderqueer, all kinds of identities, expressions, and experiences. So starting off this discussion, this comes out of, well, this was written at least in the Seattle Times. And the story takes place in Portland, Oregon, so in a different state, different city entirely. So the name of it, the story is Bar Owner Fined for Banning Transgender Patrons. All right, so a Portland business person has been ordered to pay the penalty to the T-Girls, and the T-Girls is a group of trans people that the owner had banned from his establishment last year. Now, the bar owner was ordered to pay about $400,000 to a group of trans people he banned from his establishment this year. The State Bureau of Labor and Industry Civil Rights Division imposed the penalty against Chris Penner, who's the owner of the Twilight Room Annex, the Oregonian reported. 11 people will get the money, with awards ranging from $20,000 to $50,000. And this is going to be the first penalty imposed under the 2007 Oregon Equality Act, which protects the rights of LGBT people in employment, housing, and public places. And some other of those complaints ended in various settlements. So this is kind of the first penalty imposed, at least at like the more explicit legal kind of level as well. So according to the complaint filed by the Bureau, the message said, quote, "People think that A, we're a tranny bar, or B, we're a gay bar. We are neither. People are not coming in because they just don't want to be here on a Friday night now." And so part of this kind of goes back to the form of discrimination I was talking about earlier, which, of course, kind of casts a wide net across all kinds of identity vectors, that a certain population in your business is somehow going to lower the status of your business. And so in this case, it's the presence of these trans women who are calling themselves the T-Girls, that somehow they are scaring away patrons and lowering the business value. And so the T-Girls, as a result, had said that they were devastated and humiliated. They said they went to the bar every Friday for over 2 years because they felt safe there. The bartender treated them well, and bouncers walked them to their cars as they left. And then over time, I guess the bartender had slowly or decided to just kind of ask them to stop coming out to the bar entirely. And so as a result, the actual infraction is what kind of worries me, because well, it doesn't worry me so much, but it kind of brings in the question of various, how do I say? I guess I have questions around what does this accomplish, right? So again, with these legal precedents, yes, it's interesting that now we have these kind of, this group of these, I'm not sure exactly how many there were. Oh, 11 people. So 11 trans women comprise the T-Girls. This still makes it out as though this is an isolated event, an experience that just these 11 individuals are experiencing, and that somehow this money, $20,000 to $50,000, is going to somehow rectify kind of this experience about systemic kind of transphobic views. I don't know that a penalty being imposed on the owner of this business is really teaching the business owner the importance of not establishing certain laws, so much as slapping him on the hand and saying, don't do this. We're going to now fine you for this. I think that if anything, it kind of just spurs more anger, and it gets us away from the dialogue about how do we end discussions of, or how do we end transphobia at the systemic as well as the individual level specifically. So hooray on one end, and then on the other, I suppose. That was me trying to convey a sense of kind of I guess, frustration as well. So I'm kind of in that space with both of these. So now last week when Shahan was my co-host, the wonderful Shahan was my co-host, we had talked about the murder of Isla Nettles. So Isla Nettles was a black trans woman who was murdered recently, who was recently murdered in New York. And so there was a vigil where her family came out, as well as tons of community members, people who specifically knew her and people who kind of knew her because they maybe traveled in similar circles, had kind of come out for this vigil. And part of what ended up happening here was the recent, I shouldn't say recent, the ongoing kind of publicity around the astronomical, disproportionate number of trans women of color that are being routinely murdered, quite literally just taken away from us, is becoming such that we're starting to see a lot of talk back. We're in a really productive, interesting, really great way. And at the vigil, for instance, there was this kind of tension between we're here to remember Nettles, and then also we are here because we need to speak back and we have anger that we need to use in some way. And so part of the anger that was coming out, which is being framed as shouting, in fact, the name of the article is Shouting Disrupts Vigil for Murdered Transgender Woman Isla Nettles. The shouting itself is kind of being rerouted into a, quote, productive space. And by productive, we do mean not shouting, not being political. And so there's this interesting tension going around where if you're starting to speak up about this, that at these spaces like at this vigil, it's becoming kind of condemned as an inappropriate response to the murder. Whereas for me, I think, no. This shouting back, this demanding justice, this demanding a larger discourse, and for me, justice is through the changing of the discourse so that we're not just putting someone else behind bars. In the case of Isla Nettles, it was a young black man who was put behind bars. I think that this is all very important for us to really kind of consider, or to at least start having larger dialogues about what does it mean to talk back, to fight back, to demand that the way things are unacceptable and that we do in fact need to change them. In fact, in another report here, transgender murders are 50% higher than gays and lesbians in July. Now, I don't like creating these kind of hierarchies of different oppressions, but I do think that there's also something to be said about a reality that ranges quite literally from throughout North and South America in the month of July 2013, which, and to be specific, this includes Canada, the United States, Central America, and South America. The report found that in the month of July alone, 39 people were murdered, 23 trans people, and 16 gays and lesbians. So for perspective on this gap, the New Civil Rights Movement noted that only 0.3% of the U.S. population openly identifies as trans, while 3.5% of adults identify as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. So it's a very complicated issue, but at the same time, these are dialogues we need to be having. We need to be talking about these larger systemic practices of violence against queer bodies, against trans bodies, and how violence itself can be a point of connect or connective tissue that brings us together to say we need to fight back against this. And I'm not saying that this dialogue isn't taking place. I'm saying that we need to continually talk about it. We need to not forget that this is an ongoing occurrence, and it's not something that happens, quote, over there in places like Jamaica or Russia, but it happens in places like Jamaica and Russia, as well as the United States, the supposed progressive, forward-thinking nation that doesn't have homophobia taking place in it. And this is very important to note, particularly a study that's now saying in the U.S. becoming, and I would imagine that there are some people that are wondering, how are we going to be the U.S.? How are we going to be slumped into the same category as South and Central America? Well, we're no better or worse off than any other country when it comes to hate crimes, when it comes to general distaste and disdain for queer and trans bodies. And I think it's important to note that when we look at it kind of at this global capacity, or at this, not global, I guess, but at least in this larger capacity, we start seeing that there's a trend that we are not any better than, despite the efforts of, for instance, Hillary Clinton, future President Hillary Clinton, going out and declaring that the United States is the haven for LGBT people. It isn't for a lot of us. For those of us who do not so easily pass, this is not the safe haven that I think that folks like her and the United Nations imagines. Rather, it is an awful, scary place where we are disproportionately affected and discriminated against on a regular basis. Now, I mentioned in brief Jamaica, and I want to return to an older story as well that I've talked about in the past, particularly around the murder of 17-year-old Dwayne Jones in Montego Bay, Jamaica, who was a cross-dresser, maybe was trans, we don't know, could be gay, we're not sure exactly, but nonetheless, a femme-presenting individual who was murdered in Montego Bay. So in Jamaica, the Assistant Commissioner of Police, Devin Watkins, has declared that there is no evidence showing members of the LGBT community encountering higher violent incidents than any other members of the public. What? This is to suggest perhaps that there could be, on one end, that there's a complete absolute hiding or brushing aside of the violence against queer people in Jamaica. It could also mean that when the United States gets access to certain types of images of queer people in Jamaica, they're only of the violent sort. And so there's these kind of two representations that for me are taking place as kind of potential manifestations here. So going on, Devin Watkins, the Assistant Commissioner of Police, says, our numbers generally show that we have had some violence committed against the citizens of Jamaica, inclusive of all groups, which to me sounds like there is some brushing aside or ignoring. It could also be a difference. Well, this kind of gets to it. So he adds, I have no specific evidence outside of those isolated ones. Isolated, there's that word again. That this group is a target group as opposed to, quote, ordinary citizens. And so part of this is let's take 5 hate crimes, what we might, or five violent acts against 5 individuals. And let's say of those 5 individuals, all 5 of them are queer identified in some capacity, but maybe not as publicly so. Maybe only 2 of them are. So what ends up happening in police report, and maybe only those 2 reports, explicit use of like maybe homophobic or transphobic language was used. This means that that police report is only going to show that 2 individuals of the 5 murdered were victims of homophobia and or transphobia, as opposed to all 5, despite the fact that perhaps all 5 had language used towards them, but maybe the other 3 were not out. And so it could be framed as unfounded language use, right? Like maybe the perpetrators of the violence were wrongly accusing the individuals of being gay, or of engaging in acts of buggery, for instance, or of being the wrong gender or what have you. And so this is part of the struggle with what it means to kind of collect data. So when we talk about this other story that throughout the United States, being South America, Central America, United States, and then also Canada, all of this large kind of American space here, that when we say that transgender murders are 50% higher than gays and lesbians in July, this also assumes and is based on data largely surrounding those who are identified as prior to the murder, or also posthumously through perhaps family and friends and networks or whatnot that can, in fact, confirm that the victims of this violence were, in fact, LGBT identified in some capacity. So this is something to consider when we look at stories coming out of Russia and Jamaica. It's not to say that hate's not taking place. It's to say that these are complicated systems, and we, as United States listeners, cannot just simply attribute that with certainty that this is what's taking place elsewhere. I think that it's much more important and advantageous to locate LGBT groups in Jamaica, in Russia, that are doing the work that is necessary right now, surrounding kind of what those atmospheres look like from the inside perspective. I sort of want to end with a return now to Chelsea Manning once again, and I'm going to continue to turn back to her as often as I possibly can. Some more kind of data that I was able to gather here over the last week. This one came out on August 26th, so just after our show last week here was basically more details on Chelsea Manning's gender change. So the day after, so Chelsea Manning had announced the day after her sentencing that she was planning on transitioning or engaging or beginning the gender transition process. And part of this was a response to, and so one of the questions that came up was, why then? Why did she then do it? Well, it turns out the reason why she had come out publicly as such was because after the sentencing, the military prison had said publicly that it would not provide hormone treatment. And part of why they were hoping, and by they I mean Manning as well as her attorney, were hoping that this would not be a problem was because Manning had been diagnosed with gender identity disorder by an Army psychiatrist who testified at her trial. And it's very important to kind of note that this kind of double standard here, that on one end we have a military psychiatrist or an Army psychiatrist doing diagnosing, and then despite that kind of seal of approval at the institutional level, the same institution turning around saying, but we're not going to do what we can, even though we know this is the way to kind of correct this struggle that it is that you are personally dealing with. And so as a result, Chelsea Manning came out about this because she wanted to make public that this is exactly what was going on now. She already understood that she was going to be going into a men's prison. She understood that that this is going to be part of that struggle. This also meant that if people are going to address her, that they still have to refer to her as Bradley Manning in letters, because this is the name that she is going to be recognized under the military, which is interesting despite the fact that we have the EEOC. And I'm wondering, I'm sure that this is quite naive on my part, but I'm wondering if the EEOC ruling for federal employees also applies to, for instance, Manning being able to say this is a form of discrimination, right? That I'm not having my name and my gender identity validated and verified for the way that it is that I desire it to be. So nonetheless, I'm going to keep my eyes, ears open surrounding kind of this story as it continues to unfold. But I'm going to go ahead and leave you all this week with a song that I played before that I also enjoy by Coyote Grace featuring Joe Stevens and Egrid Elizabeth, called A Guy Named Joe. Well, I thank you all. Like I mentioned, Ari should be back next week with me. We will continue our dialogues on Beyond the Binary. Again, you can find us online, facebook.com/Beyond the Binary. You can email us at bthebradio@gmail.com. Peace and love to you all. Treat each other well and continue these dialogues. Continue to learn and just love one another. All right? All right. You all have a wonderful week. Take care.